And anyway, she found excuses to stay up there the rest of the summer, helping different deans out with their weeks of camp. And things were going really well. And I knew a few weeks in that I wanted to marry that girl. And I was just in high school, kind of silly to say that. But I found someone that I wanted to marry. And then summer ended, and she had to go home. And home was about 2 hours away. And we tried to keep things going that way, but it's just hard to do that. About a month and a half after school started, she decided that the distance was just too hard, and she broke up with me. And over the course of the next few years, we somehow managed to stay friends, and we had close mutual friends too, and I would always talk to them about her, and they would always say, "Josh, just let it go. It's not going to happen. Just move on. She's done with that." It's thanks, friends, but they thought I was foolish for trying to keep something there where obviously there wasn't anything. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, we find Paul addressing the Corinthians, and there's this discussion going on about things that are foolish and things that are wise. And Paul's purpose for writing 1 Corinthians was to try to restore a spirit of unity and love in that church. Paul had started that church a few years earlier, and he's since left, and he's heard a report that there's just a lot of things going on in that church that don't sound very church-like. And so he's writing to address these things, and he wants them to know that they are together, and they're doing things that are dividing them, doing things that are causing a lot of problems, and it's just unnecessary. That's not how the church should be. That's not how the people of Christ should be. And so in verse 10 he says, "I appeal to you, brothers, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree with one another, so that there may be no divisions among you, and that you may be perfectly united in mind and thought. My brothers, some from Chloe's household have informed me that there are quarrels among you. What I mean is this: one of you says, 'I follow Paul,' another, 'I follow Apollos,' another, 'I follow Cephas,' and still another, 'I follow Christ.' Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Were you baptized into the name of Paul? I am thankful that I did not baptize any of you except Crispus and Gaius, so that none of you can say you were baptized into my name. For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not with words of human wisdom, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power." And so what's going on here is there are groups of people in this church who think that they're better than the other groups of people in this church. And they're using, reason, whatever, their wisdom to kind of elevate their position against one another. And it seems like they're using baptism as one of their arguments. Some are saying, "I was baptized by this person, and this person's more important than the person who you were baptized by, so I am more important than you." It seems like something like that is going on. And Paul kind of ends that thought by saying, "Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, and not with words, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power." And he continues in verse 18, and verses 18 through 31 are what we're really going to be looking at this morning. But he says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved it is the power of God. For it is written, 'I will destroy the wisdom of the wise. The intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate.' Where is the wise man? Where is the scholar? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Jews demand miraculous signs, and Greeks look for wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than man's wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than man's strength. Brothers, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many of you were influential. Not many of you were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. He chose the lowly things of this world, and the despised things, and the things that are not, to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. It is because of him that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us wisdom from God. That is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. Therefore, as it is written, let him who boasts, boast in the Lord. I really love this passage, and one of the things I love about it is I feel like it really reveals who God is and who God has always been. And God has always been this way. When you think about Abraham and Sarah, Abraham was too old to have children, and Sarah was too old to have children, and she was barren. She couldn't have kids. And some in their culture would have thought that she was cursed because of that. But God tells Abraham, not only are you going to have a kid, you're going to be the father of many nations, and through you all peoples on earth will be blessed. And a couple of generations later, we see Jacob and Esau in a culture that's patriarchal, where the rights and the blessings go to the oldest children. Jacob is chosen by God to be the one through whom Abraham's line continues, through whom the people of God continues, and not Esau, the older son. And God is constantly saying, you think you have it all figured out. You think you know what's right. You think you know what is best and what is good. That you're wise. But Paul says that the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. It's foolish because, dead people stay dead. It's foolish because God would not choose to become a man. It's foolish because no one would choose to go to a cross. It's foolish because the idea of the cross was the most repulsive thing to them. As the Roman philosopher Cicero noted, the very mention of the cross should be far removed, not only from a Roman citizen's body, but from his mind, his eyes, and his ears. So not only should a Roman citizen not be crucified on a cross, he shouldn't even be able to hear the term cross. He shouldn't be able to even look at a cross. The Roman jurist Julius Paulus listed crucifixion ahead of death by burning, death by beheading, and death by the wild beasts in a list of worst possible forms of capital punishment. The cross was reserved for the most offensive of crimes, including extreme violence and rebellion against Rome. And that's why the Sanhedrin accused Jesus of claiming to be a king when they took him before Pilate, is because they were trying to make Pilate think that this guy is going to lead a rebellion. So the thought that something good could come out of something so despicable was foolishness. The thought that anyone would claim that a crucified criminal would be the Son of God, would be the Christ, was foolishness. And the thought that the cross would come to symbolize the work and the power of God was foolishness. And Paul says that this message of the cross, that is the power of God. And that word power in the Greek language is dynamos, which is where we get our word for dynamite. It's, just to give you a picture of how powerful this word is and how powerful the message of the cross is. It's like this, explosive kind of power. And to back up his point, Paul turns to the book of Isaiah, chapter 29, and he quotes verse 14 to them. And Isaiah was a prophet chosen by God to be a kind of spokesperson to the people of Judah. And so this is what God wants Isaiah to say to the people of Judah. And I'm going to look at a few verses before and after that one. These people come to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship of me is based on merely human rules that they have been taught. Therefore, once more, I will astound these people with wonder upon wonder. The wisdom of the wise will perish. The intelligence of the intelligent will vanish. Woe to those who go to great depths to hide their plans from the Lord, who do their work in darkness and think, who sees us? Who will know? You turn things upside down, as if the potter were thought to be like the clay. What shall what is formed say to the one who formed it, you did not make me? Can the pot say to the potter, you know nothing? And so God says that I will frustrate their wisdom. I will frustrate their intelligence. And that word frustrate literally means to have no place. No place. It is displaced. There is no place for their wisdom. And so right after he says that there is no place for the intelligence of the intelligent, he says, where is the wise man? In what place is the wise man? Where is the scholar? In what place is the scholar? Where is the philosopher of this age? In what place is the philosopher of this age? There is no place for the wise man. There is no place for the scholar. There is no place for the philosopher of this age. And they lived in a culture where they believed that character was revealed over time, that people didn't change, rather just who they are, it was eventually revealed. And so Paul says that God is going to reveal the character of their wisdom. And so the question for us to consider this morning is, what will your wisdom be revealed as? Or to put it differently, are you ready to be thought a fool? We're blessed to live in a community where our folly isn't widely considered folly. But Paul's statement is still true today. A couple of months ago, there was a study published in the journal Cognitive Science, and it was titled, "Children Exposed to Religion Have a Hard Time Distinguishing Fact from Fiction." And so in this study, the conductors of it got a group of children the ages of 5 and 6 years old together, and they categorized them into 4 groups. One group was children who went to a public school and did not go to church. The next group was children who went to a public school but also went to church. The next group were students who did not go to who didn't go to a public school but did go to church. And the last group was a group of students who went to both a private Christian school and church regularly. And so they would ask these students they would tell these students statements and ask them to respond and say, is this possible or is this not possible? And so something they might have asked was, is this possible or not possible? Moses parted the Red Sea with his stick. And so those who didn't have exposure to religion, the group who didn't go to church and didn't go to a private Christian school, widely said that no, that is not possible. Whereas the other 3 groups, those who were exposed to religion, said that yes, that is possible. But then they changed the statement a little bit, and they said something like this: Moses moved the mountain with his stick. Is this possible or not possible? And again, those who were not exposed to religion said, no, that is not possible. But those who were exposed to religion had a hard time answering this question because, no, that didn't happen, but something like that did happen. So how do we respond to that? And most of them said, yes, that is possible. And so the results of this study were that children exposed to religion have a hard time distinguishing fact from fiction. And that's the world that we live in, and that is the attitude towards our faith, that it is foolish. And I read responses on different websites about this study, and on one website where I read, there were dozens of responses, and there was no response given to kind of support the children who had been exposed to religion. On another website I read, there were, again, dozens of responses, and there were probably 3 or 4 people who did stand up for these children and who tried to explain why that might be, or that just because some people don't think it's possible doesn't mean that it couldn't happen. Again, just that's the nature of faith versus those who don't have faith. But that's the world that we live in, and those responses who favored the kids who were exposed toward religion, those were always met with more responses of harsh criticism. And it was kind of sad to read, to be honest. But that's the world that we live in. And I remember being in high school and talking with friends who, weren't necessarily Christians. I had a friend named Chris, and he was an atheist, and I had a class with him. I rode the bus with him, and every day we would have conversations about our faith, and they were friendly conversations. We both respected each other and had good conversations, but my words never did anything. My words just gave him more words to come back with me, and that's what happens in arguments a lot of times. They just kind of add fuel to the fire, and they never really resolve anything. It's hard to change someone's mind from an argument a lot of times, and you don't even have to be right to win an argument. So what do we do, in a world where we're considered foolish for what we believe, for what we say? What do we do? In verse 17, Paul said, Christ didn't send me to baptize. He sent me to preach the gospel, but not with words. In chapter 2, verse 4, he says, my message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with the demonstration of the Spirit's power. And the message of the cross has always been one of action. It was the act of Jesus on the cross that displayed the saving power of God. It was that act, that action. That's why we're here this morning. And so again, the question for us to ask ourselves is, am I ready to be thought a fool? And there are a lot of ways this might play out. In our culture, it's okay to not turn the other cheek. But maybe being foolish would be turning the other cheek. Maybe forgiving someone rather than seeking revenge. Because I think that revenge, to a degree, is an acceptable response in our culture. Maybe it looks like humbling ourselves before those others in our position would belittle. Maybe it looks like being willing to sacrifice something of ourselves and giving up some sort of security or a sense of comfort in order to do something for others. I feel like those are all things that, maybe our culture doesn't necessarily value, but ways that we can show them the Spirit of God and the heart of God. I do think that faith in our culture is hard. On one hand, we have a lot of people who are atheists and who say there is no God and there is no point to religion. Like the pot saying to the potter, you know nothing. You are nothing. And on the other hand, there's also a side of America that's very religious and very pluralistic when it comes to religion. There's so many different religions that people practice in our culture. So many different voices saying, this is what you should believe, this is what you should believe. And so, again, a lot of different things, a lot of different voices saying, what you believe is foolish. And so what do we do with all of this? Again, am I willing to be thought a fool? Because believing that the message of the cross is real and true and powerful will make me a fool. And living that way will make me look foolish. I went on to marry that girl from the beginning. I married her. I was a fool for her. And here's the message of the cross. That God is a fool for you. He loves you and He would do anything for you, and He would do anything to make sure that you had just a chance to experience His perfect and complete and redemptive love. He would live for you, and He did. And He would die for you, and He did. And the wisdom of the world says, the poor fool, if those he loved didn't want him back, he should just let them go. And he certainly shouldn't die for them. God's a fool. And they're right. But He's a fool in the best and most beautiful and most perfect way. And if I'm going to choose something with my life, it's someone who would be a fool for me. And so, again, the question for us is, will we be fools for God? There's a story of a wise professor who seemed to know the answer to any question asked of him. And this bothered his students. They thought, there's no way he knows everything. And so a group of them decided that they were going to try to stump him. And so they thought, and they finally devised a plan. They caught a small bird, and one of them was going to go to the professor holding the bird in his hands like this so the professor couldn't see it, and ask the professor, "Sir, I have a bird in my hands. Is it alive or is it dead?" And so they asked the professor. And they asked the professor, "Is this bird alive or is it dead?" And if the professor said, "It's dead," he would open up his hands to reveal a living bird. But if he said the bird was alive, then they would just close their hand together and crush the bird, so that the professor would be wrong either way. And so the professor is asked this question, and he's just thinking, and and the students think that they've stumped him, that he doesn't know. And finally the professor looks up at them and says, "Son, the answer to that question lies in your hands." And that's how it is with this question. Will you be thought a fool? The answer lies in my hands. It lies in your hands. When you're a fool for something, your actions speak louder than and better than any words. And I know that any conversation I had with Ashley, it wasn't necessarily the conversations that brought her back to me, but it was my actions towards her. And I remember after we broke up the first time, trying to convince her that she shouldn't have done that, trying to talk to her about that and say, "We can make this work, I'll come down there more," something like that. But words did not work. It's with our actions that our folly will be revealed as wisdom. It's through our actions that we can reach this world. It's through our actions that we will make a difference to this world. And it's through our actions that the power of God will be demonstrated. And so again, do you want to be a fool? Do you want to be a part of that? The answer lies in your hands. And as we enter our time of invitation this morning, I just want to say that, if there's someone here who wants to be a part of a place where they can experience the love of God and feel God's love, this is an awesome place, because the people here, they truly do have the love of God in their hearts, and they truly do love you. And it is evident that God is real by the way that everyone here treats each other and loves each other. And if there's someone here who wants to make a decision to become a part of this and to give their lives to Christ and to be baptized into His name so that they can know God and experience Him and His love, then we invite you to come forward as we sing this song of invitation.
Invitation song number 500. Let's stand and we'll sing verses 1 and 3. Almost Persuaded. Almost persuaded now to believe, almost persuaded Christ to receive. See now some soul to say, "Go, Spirit, go thy way." Some more convenient day, only I'll call. Almost persuaded, harvest is past. Almost persuaded, doom comes at last. Almost cannot avail, almost is but to fail. Sad, sad the bitter well, almost but lost. Let's close and sing the first verse of number 542. Savior, like a shepherd lead.
Savior, like a shepherd, lead us. Much we need thy tender care. In thy present masters feed us. For our leaves thy foes prepare. Blessed Jesus, thou hast brought us thine we are. Blessed Jesus, thou hast brought us thine we are. Have a good evening.